Welcome, welcome to Spotlight on behalf of Intelligence Music. Today I've got an artist with me. Do you want to tell us who you are and what you do?
Yes, hello, and thanks for having me. My name is No Gimmicks, Nogymmx. My real name is Jimmy. I am an artist, producer, whatever you want to call it, from originally from Ireland, but I've been living in Korea for about 10 years now. So I've been living here, working here, and making music here. So I've been doing mostly instrumental music, ranging from like electronic, but mostly centered around hip hop, which is what I uh, kind of grew up listening to for some reason in Ireland. And yeah, it's like hip hop, lo-fi hip hop, chill hop, whatever you want to call it. That kind of music that people study to. And I usually kind of try to mix a little bit of the Korean aspect into it. So I mix a lot of Korean folk samples or just using instruments from traditional Korean music itself.
I love that. Lo-fi beats to study, relax to with a Korean spin. You mentioned I'm interested to hear about your background in Ireland. How does a guy end up going from Europe to a place like Korea?
Um, you know what? I get asked that a lot over here, like why Korea, um, especially from Korean people, but also from people in Europe, because it's just such a different culture and is so far away generally. And I don't really have an answer. I had just finished university in Ireland, and I wanted to take a year or two out and just kind of go to a culture that wasn't at all like my own. And I was interested in Korea a little bit through movies I had seen. I didn't know much about it, to be honest, other than those films. But yeah, I think I just chose it because it was very different, and I wanted to kind of step out of my comfort zone for at least a year or two, and then that year or two just kind of kept rolling and into the next, and it's been 10 years now. So
Incredible. So before you know it, you've just completely adopted a whole new culture and locale. I love that. I wanted to ask what you went to school for, and is it relevant to your music journey or kind of an accessory to it?
um, it's not at all related, really. It's I went to school for software development, programming, um, and it's like I guess there's a little bit of creativity to it depending on what you're doing. Um, but for me, it was more following steps and logic, so it wasn't really related to music for me. And I guess some people, some artists, amazing artists, have the same background and then they go into electronic music production and then create their own VSTs and stuff. I haven't done that. I would love to actually make my own VST at some point if I ever had an idea what to do, but no. For now, programming has absolutely nothing to do with music or what anything else I do these days.
Well, I can absolutely relate to that. I also came from a biochemistry degree in university, moved into music, nothing to do with each other whatsoever. I feel a little jealous that you have some web development under your belt. I feel like as far as adjacent skills go, that's certainly not a bad one to have. So I imagine that you're probably making this Korean-inspired lo-fi on a laptop, right? What kind of specs do you run? What plugins do you like to use to make this stuff?
Yeah, so I currently use the MacBook Pro the M1 Pro, the 16-inch one with I think it's 32 gigabytes of RAM, and the M1 Max, whatever. I think M1 Max is it? Yeah, the top processor of the M1 series. And it's a beast. Honestly, the computer is the best thing in my house, I think. Um, And in terms of DAW, I use Logic right now, Logic Pro. But for years prior to Logic, um, I was using Reason, Propeller Hertz Reason, and I used that from I think Reason 4 all the way to Reason 10 or 11. I still have it, and I sometimes go into it just for nostalgic reasons. But yeah, I moved to Logic once I got the MacBook. Actually, I had the Mac Mini prior, so I moved it to Logic when I got that because it was just kind of it ran smoother, and Reason had its downsides to it. So I moved over, but I started off with Reason. Now I'm using Logic Pro. VST wise, I'm a bit, and I feel like most producers are, not to call anyone out specifically, I'll call myself out, but I'm a hoarder when it comes to plugins. So I have all these plugins, and uh, especially the pretty looking ones, I'll download them, buy them because they look good, sound good, and then I'll probably never use them, or I'll use them once in a song like at the start, and then forget to use it again. But in terms of plugins I do actually use, would have to be FabFilter plugins. So like the Pro Q3 and the MB, the multiband compressor. And in terms of fun stuff, the Keyscape piano, I use that pretty much in everything. Um, Imagiro's piano is pretty cool. He's another fellow producer, and that great value for money for that piano. Um, yeah, and then what else do I use a lot? Contact, I guess. Like for I have a machine, the Native Instruments drum pad, so I link that up with the machine two, I think it is, and then I don't know if you want me to go into hardware or not, but I also have like the SP404 and some other stuff for sampling and drums and all that kind of crack.
Sounds like you're well equipped. So yeah, I do have a couple of questions, I guess. I'm definitely a VST hoarder, right? I'm equally guilty. I find myself collecting all forms of different sound producing. Especially, I'm a fan of synthesis, synth design, stuff like that. And there's infinite iterations of those kind of programs. I'll always find myself back inside Serum inevitably.
Right. Mm.
So I'm a big fan of Contact, though. You said you like to use a machine drum pad. So when you're making music, are you programming in by hand all of your beats? Is it a little bit hit or miss? What is your say you were going to build a song right now? How would you begin to approach it?
Um, so yeah, I to start off with your last question there was how do I start a song? I find myself generally starting with piano. However, I'm trying to force myself to start with the drums because that I think for me, being working in this genre with the drums and the groove being very important. I feel like playing the music prior to making the groove kind of makes it a little bit harder, or just not as I don't know, conducive to like what I want to achieve. But yeah, so I would probably do like a these days like a 50-50. Start with the drums sometimes, or I'll just have a day where I create a load of drum loops that I like and set them aside. And then in the future, when I sit down and just think of some piano loops or synth or whatever I'm using, then I'll just put the drum loop that I've already made in the track and play over that. And maybe I'll keep it, or maybe I'll change the drums later or not. And yeah, with the drums, I try to make everything by hand through the drum pad because it just has that. If you play it, if you finger drum it, or if you play it with your hands, whatever, you get more of a natural feel. You get that little Dilla bounce, which I find really helps with the the feel of your tracks. So it's a little bit more groovy. Sometimes I do, though. I do go against that, and I'll play around with the samples on Logic itself, on the timeline, or on something like maybe even through Machine itself. Like they have their little drum sequencer there. So most of the time, I will play it with my hands, and then I'll mess around with it, and then I'll add a few other elements on top, whether it's like vinyl effects or just background elements to kind of fill out the drums. But most of the time, I'll try to play it myself, as opposed to like using loops or just yeah, using one of those preset drum machine thingamajiggies.
I like it. It's controversial almost because you hear so many producers touting this idea of you want to start with the music first and then add the drums. But I believe in the same way you described, it's kind of a 50-50 thing. I especially like to get a bare bones uh drum track up myself and start building the sound around that. I think it helps for structure a little bit.
Mhm.
I'm curious, what's your favorite piece of music that you've made? Do you have one, or does it oscillate depending on the day, the time, and what you're involved in?
Uh, yeah, I do think it oscillates a lot. Like probably not by the day, but definitely by release. Like if I'll probably have a new favorite every time I release a new album. Um, so I guess my current favorite would be from my last album. Um, I think it's probably a song called "Salt Wind" from my last album, Pado. That one, or "South of the River" from the same album. Those two would be my current favorites of mine. Yeah, currently, but it moves around a lot. I think that album is probably my favorite piece of work that I've done so far. I do have another album coming that might top it, but we'll see.
Love to hear it. So you talk about this process of putting out an album, and I'm curious what's the longevity of your career like? Or I guess if I could break that up into smaller questions, how many albums have you put out? How long does it take roughly to assemble an album? And when you go to make one, does it start out with the idea to make an album, or does it happen sort of by accident after making many songs?
Um, okay, so in terms of numbers of albums, I think if we're talking like what Spotify or what the streaming um, platforms classify as an album, I think it's seven tracks or something like that. I think I have seven or seven with eighth coming, I think. With that, and then a few EPs which would have six tracks, maybe five tracks on those also. So just albums, seven, and one more coming next month. Oh no, well, I would have more actually, eight, and with nine coming next month. Um, my first album release, I released it 2013. Well, it's on Spotify. It's 2014, but actually re-released it later because I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I was just putting music out when I was at like what 11 years ago. And at that time, it wasn't. I didn't have a plan for an album. That was just music I'd made from like 2010 to 2013. I was just practicing basically. I wasn't very good in 2010, slightly better in 2013. So that was just, yeah, it was just music that had kind of gotten through the quality control at that time. These days, sometimes I do have an idea for an album before I start making any song, and sometimes that album doesn't happen, depending on like I'm not very good at sitting down with the idea of an entire album and then making 10 tracks or whatever it is, based around that very quickly. I'm quite slow. So sometimes the album could change because one month I might feel like I want to make an album that's upbeat, jazzy, or whatever. But then as I'm working on it 4 months down the line, my mood might change, something might happen, or just I'm not feeling it anymore, and then that becomes an EP, and I work on something else that is more in tune with how I feel at that time. So sometimes, yeah, the album ideas generally come within 5 or 6 songs in, and then I'm like, okay, I wanna move this way with those tracks, and then anything I make that doesn't fit there, it'll be a single, or it'll be um, a short EP in the future, separate to the one I set aside. Um, and in terms of the like album story, like sometimes I like to give the albums a story behind it, um, and the kind of theme that is also kind of depending on the artwork as well. Um, that can sometimes come before the album's finished, and then the artwork and story helps me to finish the songs within the same kind of mood and theme, and also to come up with the song names, which I think is probably the hardest part of music creation, is trying to think of a good, unique song name. But yeah, long story short, I think I have 9 albums, one on the way, I think it would be 10, unless I can't count. And then, yeah, mostly uh, the songs come first, and then the album, about halfway through the album, will appear. And then I'll kind of maybe reshape the songs that exist for that theme, or maybe they already created the theme, and I just create 4 or 5 more songs based on the same idea.
I love it. So, 8 to 9 albums, especially dating from work going as far back as 2010. That's a pretty lengthy career, like 14 years in music. Where do you see this taking you? What's your hope for it? Look into the future.
Yeah. It's a good question. At one point, I think I wanted to, yeah, focus more on different genres, and um, I wanted to work with different artists, like in different fields, like vocalists, rappers, whatever it was, and then kind of maybe branch out into producing, more so than just like doing my own stuff. But I don't know. I'm not. I don't really have an answer for that now, because um, I'm honestly just happy to make music, and if I can, my goal and dream would be to continue being able to make music the way I want, and still being able to afford to do it, and be able to not worry about whether I should release this track or that track or whatever, and just if I like it, it goes out, which isn't always the case. But yeah, I think I would. My goal is very short term. My goal is to work with more live instrumentalists, especially Korean folk artists. You'll see some of it on my upcoming album, but I'd like to work with more artists that have nothing to do with the genre I work in, to blend the different styles, that usually wouldn't be seen or heard together. And I also, the second thing would be more local stuff. I want to do more live shows, like live sets, DJ stuff, live mixes with the Roland SP404. I want to kind of just push myself into the more nerving kind of places, like cafes, bars, whatever. Kind of just push myself out there, to do things again. Like coming to Korea those years ago was just kind of do something that I'm not 100% sure about, and just kind of see if it works. Like the good thing about music right now, and for a lot of artists, is you don't even need to show your face. You can just upload music, sit in your room, and do it whatever, and that's absolutely fine. It's great. Um, but for me, short term, yeah, goal is more push myself a little bit more in terms of just getting out there in the local scene, work with more local artists in Korea, um, and try to, yeah, just do a bit more non music related, but more, I guess, promotion stuff, but also, yeah, just kind of doing stuff that I might enjoy. Like I did DJing for a while, and not my own stuff, but other music, and I enjoyed it, but I haven't done it for a long time. So I would like to get back into that, but more for my own music and music I would from other artists that I like.
It's very relatable. I can understand where you're coming from. I view almost DJing as sort of a necessary evil to me in the sense that I'd much rather be making my own music in the privacy of my home. And I think a lot of artists are dying to perform it live. I think for me, it's more of a necessity of getting it out there, right? Doing what it takes to circulate the music. But for me, the joy is in the creating part. I do. I really like this creativity in lo-fi hip hop, especially with the utilization. I know I've heard a lot of lo-fi hip hop that has a little bit of like an Asian cultural spin on it. So I think to utilize actual, local instrumentalists is a great step in that direction. I was gonna say that I've been attending music live in some format since 2013. So I've been going to shows for a long time, and I've never been to a lo-fi show before. I'm curious, like, when you imagine playing your own music live, you mentioned cafes, coffee shops. I think I heard you right. What does that performance look like for you? You said you would have. I heard Roland, which I imagine is you're referring to your piece of gear and you'd be hitting triggering clips. Like, what would your set be like?
Um, so yeah, I think just for the music I make, it wouldn't be. It's not gonna be a. It's not gonna be a live show in a club where people are off their heads or anything like that. But so it would be more in the same kind of line as jazzy daytime kind of places where you go, you drink your coffee, you talk, but there's music on in the background as well, which is cool. Or you just go there and you actively listen to it too, which is even better. Um, I'm not. I don't have like any super goals where I'm the headlining anything, but just to push myself a little bit, I think that's what I would like to do. In terms of the set itself, yeah. So currently, just due to ability and lack thereof, my set would be the Roland SP404, like the sampler, and I would load up my songs on there, and I would, yeah, I would play it like a DJ set, like where you mix the songs in. And the SP404 has like live effects on it, which is cool. It has like filter effects, stutter stuff. It has lo-fi effects, EQs, and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty cool to be used in a live setting. And yeah, that's, I think that would be the goal for now. And in the future, which would be really cool, would be more of an actual live thing where fellow collaborators might play a section of the song live with their instrument, whether I play the piano or whether I play the backing track on the SP404. I don't know, but that would be a thing for the future, I think. But yeah, for current sets, it would just be the SP404, kind of like um yeah, like a hip hop set, and you're just kind of like adding a few effects, and maybe some of the other buttons you could trigger samples that match the vibe, or just someone saying yeah or something like that.
I love it. So I'm looking at pictures of the SP404 right now, and I love how unconventional it is. In fact, I'm pretty sure that my mentor in production has this as one of his many pieces of gear. I had a couple questions related to that, mostly just because when you imagine like a live performance, especially for home produced music, everyone thinks inevitably of the turntables and the desk with the spinning vinyl and whatnot. This looks almost like a calculator.
Yeah.
It's very lo-fi, I guess, for those who aren't in the know, right? Where oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. I like the idea of a jazzy daytime listening experience, something a little bit more low key, not necessarily like going overboard with the drinks and the volume, but just like having guest features where you have local musicians playing along. That sounds like a beautiful change of pace to me.
Mhm.
Um, what would you say, if you don't mind me switching gears here? What's the best and worst parts of the job for you?
Um, the best parts are um, collaborating. I think is one of the best parts. Being able to collaborate and meet people that you wouldn't have had the chance to before from so many different countries. Just because you make a similar type of music, or maybe you don't make a similar type, but you want to work together still. Um, I think, yeah, probably collaborations has been one of the biggest benefits for a few reasons. Like one, obviously, you have people that you can then talk to about the music or about the industry, and then you also have people that you can call your friends. You can meet them when you do go to, if you do end up going to the country that they are in. Or the other benefit is that uh, working with so many different artists kind of helps to elevate your sound too. So you learn things from other artists working with them. You learn whether it's techniques or just um like production methods and or mixing methods or this kind of thing. Um and or just like how like if you send a song, part of a song to someone, and it comes back, and just the way it comes back, it can inspire you for a future song, and like, oh, I could do it this way, I could do that. So I think, yeah, for me, there's obviously so many benefits working from home, obviously, but I think collaboration is a huge one, and I would say that's the biggest. Um, and the biggest downside or drawback of the job is the self doubting that is inevitable. I think because um, like you, it's not like a regular job. I do also have a regular job, unlike a lot of producers. I don't want to really, at least currently, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket, and I do like the separation between music and just a salary job. Um, but I think when your job, or at least part of your job, is based around you being creative, and if your financial situation is based around you being creative, it can be very tough, and it can be very difficult to get out of that when you get stuck in a creative like, I don't know, like a drought, where you can't think of a new song, or everything you come up with isn't really to your standard, if you have high standards or whatever. And then you can just keep digging yourself deeper into this little hole of self-doubt, because one, your financial situation is based on it, on you being creative, and if you can't be creative all the time, of course, no one can be, but it's like stress. When stress causes skin problems or something, well, then when you have skin problems, it gives you more stress. It's just like this never ending um cycle, and it's the same in music, I guess. If you're financial situation is, or any kind of situation is related to you being creative, it puts a lot of pressure and stress on you to be creative, which isn't very conductive or conducive to being creative. So it's like this horrible cycle. So I think just that pressure that a lot of artists feel can be quite difficult, which you don't really get from other regular jobs, like that don't require creativity. Obviously, there are pressures and other issues related to every job, but in this specific creativity related one, I think that is a big one.
Definitely. I think that's something all artists in any medium can relate to is the imposter syndrome and the worry that, like, imagine this, right? You know, with a 9 to 5, when you go into work that day, you are getting paid. You are accomplishing something, you're making money. Versus when you hop in the studio, you don't know if those 4 hours you just spent are going to pay off. That's time that you are putting out there that you may never get a return on. You know what I mean? I think that's terrifying for a lot of people. What would you say, with that in mind? What have been your best strategies for overcoming creative block and self doubt?
Um, Taking breaks for me, and I think it's like I think it's like a muscle you can work on. Really, I think being able to kind of forgive yourself, and also just being able to just kind of make it less important. Like when something doesn't happen the way you want it to, or you hit a creativity drought, or uh, yeah, you just hit this rut where you just can't move forward with the, maybe you can make songs, but you're not making the ones that you want. I think a lot of the time it's just um, building up the idea that that's fine, like that happens, and just like being able to then be like oh, oh well, let me try again in a month. I suck, whatever. Self-deprecation is fine as you come back to it. But yeah, I think that I think I've been able to build that up by just, yeah, being going through it in different areas, like self-doubt in music, or trying things that is a little bit out of your comfort zone, and if you fail, you fail. Once you get used to failing, it doesn't you realize it's really not a problem. It's not a bad thing that you should be scared of, really, because everyone fails in everything sometimes. So if you're failing currently in music, doesn't mean you're never not going to it doesn't mean you're never going to succeed. Like, you'll get there eventually if you want and try. But I think that's a big thing, just the mental aspect of trying to get that mentality, and then it helps a lot to overcome it. And the second thing I mentioned was definitely taking breaks. Like, if I'm working on a song and it's not working, generally 9 times out of 10, if it doesn't work, like when I have that little creative spark, then it's not going to work. I'll just forget about it. But if I have a song that I'm pretty happy with to a point, but the more I listen, the worse it gets, then I just take a break, give it a week, give it a month, depending on like my release schedule or whatever, if I can. And a lot of the time, you come back with fresh ears and a different mindset. Maybe 1 month a song will be terrible to you, and another month you come back, um, and your mood is different, and all of a sudden the song hits different. So uh, yeah, I think taking breaks is a huge thing.
Couldn't agree more myself, honestly. I especially like your description of I couldn't tell which one of these you were corresponding to muscle. I think all of it is conducive to muscle activity, right? The more you work it, the better it gets. But I almost like this idea of self-forgiveness as a muscle, being able to get better at moving past the hurdles and being able to snap back into that creative flow state quicker each time, because we're all our own worst critics, right? And I feel like people people will beat themselves up and shred themselves way harder than any stranger on the internet is ever going to do, right? I
100.
think
Mm.
the progressive oh my goodness, desensitization to failure is crucial. I've seen people delay their first release on SoundCloud for months, years, only to have it, come out, and they're like, "Wow, that was underwhelming." Then everything else happens for them in quick succession, but that process could have started so much earlier. They had just like, made peace, committed to letting the crappy music out in 2010, and like confronting things head on so that they can begin to, start to evolve from there. Um,
Exactly.
I wanted to flash back a little bit. So you mentioned art for the music. I had some questions about like your release strategy and what goes into it. So if I could come back to the art, where does the artwork for your releases come from?
Um, so it depends, but if we go by the album, my 1, 2, 3, uh, 3 of my last albums, 3 of my albums, not last ones, but come from my friend who lives in Korea. Also, he is a fantastic artist, and he has this ability to just kind of, yeah, kind of draw what I have in my mind. I can't draw, so I just kind of um, bombard him with messages about, like, as if he's ChatGPT. I'm like, I need this, and then he'll come up with something. I'll push it along and again, and we'll get to it, a certain style. And he also has experience here in Korea, so he knows a lot about the Korean folk art and the the style of it and that kind of thing. So I look to him a lot for those kind of albums. Some I think one album was by a Korean tattoo artist. Again, because I wanted a Korean style, kind of the art style. I wanted it to be like the Korean kind of folk art. Um, and it's just a person I knew then, so I was just, yeah, it was an easy choice. And then for, I guess, for albums, it's easy because you have a lot of time to come up with the artwork, and you have the ideas already, so it's kind of easy. But for me, the singles are quite hard because when you release a single, you need artwork with it, but you can't always pay premium dollars for every single track, which you can do for an album. But for singles, generally, if it's a self-release, it'll it'll be like a photo I've taken myself, um, and then I'll just edit it with Photoshop or Affinity or something like that. Um, or it might just be, I want just trying to see what have I used in singles. Usually, yeah, or my friends' photos. A lot of the time, I'll use photos that they've taken. Um, or if it's like a single from an album, I'll take the album artwork and remove some of the layers and just take one element of it and use that as one of the single art covers for that. And the other ones, then I guess if it's a label release or whatever, I have less control. Although I do try to have as much control over the artwork as possible because it's quite important. And then sometimes if I have an idea and it doesn't match my friend's style, I will look. I have There's a lot of artists you can find on Instagram that I follow or other places, and sometimes if they have a specific style that I want for a specific EP or album or whatever, I will contact them and hopefully we can sort something out.
I like it. I'm looking at the artwork for Pado right now. Am I pronouncing that right?
Paddle.
Pado. Yeah, it's beautiful. I love the Korean folk and styled aesthetic that you've managed to embody. I guess my question is, what do you typically budget for this stuff? Am I allowed to ask that? When you commission art for an album, how much of an investment does that tend to be for you?
Um, so generally from my the majority of the albums that I've paid for, it's about $300 would be what I normally budget for. Um, I think I can't remember how much I paid, for Padded. I think it was about 300. I'll have to ask my friend if I paid
Sure.
him didn't pay him enough, then he'll not be listening to this. Um, but yeah, it's about 300, generally for an album. I think it's probably on the low side, to be honest. I'd like to pay a little bit more. If it's a self-release, it's a little bit harder to go above, like, 400 because you wanna make some of it back at least, and with self-releases is a lot harder, but if the artist puts a lot of time into it, why not? I think they definitely deserve more than that, and, if I could, I would, but generally, I budget for about 300, 400 if it includes animation. Um and, sometimes if there's a song or if there's a piece of art that already exists and I would like to use it as album, artwork, then I'll get permission from the artist to use the already existing artwork, and then that it would be a lot cheaper because you're using something that's already available online and they don't have to create it, so the budget, I guess, would be about 100 for that, just for the rights to use it. But I think I've only ever done that once, um, and it was fine. The artist is very very nice about it. So yeah, I would say personally for self releases, I would budget about 300. Although I do think, depending on the artwork, I do think artists deserve a lot more.
Sure. Don't think I was coming for your throat with that one either. I,
Um,
I I can absolutely sympathize with wanting to give more acknowledgement to the artists that help us, fabricate the dream. I think that this is mostly a perspective question, right? Like if an up and coming artist was gonna watch this and figure, how am I gonna get like a an image that summarizes the idea of what I'm trying to embody with my music? What should I expect? I think,
yeah,
like 300 sounds reasonable. 400 with animations. I don't think you need to feel any guilt. I'm sure your artist friends are happy to help you contribute to this. That being said, you mentioned some other stuff. I wanted to focus on label release versus self release. So you have released with labels. Do you care to go into detail about like who they were, what your experience was, and how that compared to releasing solo?
sure. I guess I won't go into specifics if it's a negative on that specific label, but there are definitely negatives. But it generally, uh, the biggest difference between releasing like a self release and on a label is that self release you have 100% total control over the release schedule, the artwork, the song choices, which I think is a huge thing, um, and just generally everything. I love self releases just because I have to do everything, but I like that. I like being able to have to do all the other stuff that isn't related to music, whether it's commission the artwork or come up with all the names, come up with the title and the order of the tracks, and then all the background stuff like the registering it with the different like the different pros and the publishers and all that kind of stuff. I don't really like the promotion side of things. I think that's the biggest downside to self releases. You have to do all the promotion yourself, and it sucks. But everything else I do love about self releases. Um, Obviously, you can't release 100% self releases all the time unless you're lucky because it's very difficult to get your music out there, um, every time at least. Or it is now. For There was a while a few years ago when it was a lot easier, when the Spotify and Apple Music gods were good to us. But with labels, I've released with a lot. I guess I've released with labels like Lo-Fi Girl or Lo-Fi Records, Hip Dozer, the Jazz Hop Cafe, Dream Hop. I've released with Chill Beats Music, Chill Lo-Fi Music, and yeah, a lot of others. Stereo Fox, one of my favorites. Yeah, quite a few labels that I'm not gonna be able to remember now. But if you if someone asks me, I'll search them at some point. Um, and the biggest difference then when you do release with a label is even the labels themselves are different on how they work. Some of them are very hands-on, and you get to work with them every step of the way, which is great. Some of them are uh, very not hands-on, very hands-off, and sorry, is it well, hands off could be a good thing, but they're yes, maybe not hands off is the right term. They just sit back and they do everything, or they've done everything, and then you find it out what happens later upon release. So the communication isn't great for some releases, which is understandable. They have hundreds of releases a month, or they have hundreds of releases a year at least. So they can't not every label can be as hands-on as some. I think that's a big downside, not being able to like communicate immediately with someone. It might be a week wait between emails, or it might be um, a month wait for like the artwork or whatever it is. There's waiting, and it's horrible because then something happens and you have to go back, and it just pushes everything forward. Because if it were me, if it was a self-release, you could sort it out then and there, or at least you know the timeline itself, and you just get everything done yourself. Of course, the benefits for any people that want to uh, start releasing music now, or are thinking about releasing with labels, obviously a big benefit is the push that they can give you. Like if they have their own homegrown playlists, or if they have a good following on social media or on YouTube, or if they are uh, kind of connected to a blog or radio stations or whatever it is. They can definitely help push your music in a way that you wouldn't be able to, initially, at least, unless like your song is viral on social media or whatever. Um, and some labels are really good with that, and some are not. Like some labels, kind of that you take 50, they take 50% of your cut, and all they do is release your song. So sometimes it's like, yeah, I could have done that myself and not given up 50%. Sometimes you give up the 50% and it's worth it. You get a huge push that you wouldn't have without it. And another thing, good thing about labels, I guess, it does help with networking. Like you get to meet other artists, you get to meet people from the label sometimes, that can help you in other ways in the industry, or just like being able to network with other artists. If you release with a label on a compilation and someone else has released the same compilation, they're likely to listen to it. They're likely to listen to your song. You might connect over that, which has happened to me a few times, especially when you start out. I was messaging everyone that I was releasing with, and I was like, "Love your song," blah blah blah. Um, Not even as a promotional thing. I did enjoy this music, and I was just happy to be on a compilation at the time. Um, so yeah, that's a good thing. I think you need to just be, for anyone like that's starting out, or anyone in general. Just I think people should be more selective of who they release with. Just because it's a label doesn't mean they actually do anything. Like I can create my own label, um, and not actually help the artists. But yeah, I think as long as the label is communicative, and you can see that they try. They have a Discord with events, or they have a social media with stuff going on there. As long as there's some part of them that like they're working hard and doing whatever. It's I think that's the most important part for smaller labels, and then bigger labels, you're hoping to push your music um to to the Spotify editorials or something like that generally.
Thank you. That was a very thorough breakdown, and I think something that a lot of artists could stand to hear nowadays. I am sure you've probably vaguely heard of it, but in my sphere, there's been this immense pushback against labels lately. Artists kind of trying to reclaim a little bit of power through indie releases, and it's like I'm sure you understand, right? It's exhausting to be your own cheerleader, to be a shameless self promoter. Would you say that since you have so much experience comparatively with all these different label releases, I'm gathering that there's a trade off, right? Like you sacrifice some of that income for some of these promotional machines that can really get your message out there. Do you think that ultimately the best strategy is to utilize the best of both worlds and sign on with the label to get your name out there so that way it lends more future credibility to your self release? Or would you recommend finding a good label and sticking with it after doing thorough research and making sure that they are in fact worth the exchange? uh, that how would you, with what you know now, what advice would you give to somebody?
Um, so I think unless you're lucky, um, unless you're very lucky in terms of your releases and your self releases, I mean, and your timing. I think if you released in this genre specifically, like lo-fi hip hop or whatever, if you started releasing music 2017, 16, 18, 19, there's a good chance that you've released good music. There's a good chance that you've built up a bit of a following because it was a huge genre, or it was a huge um, the growth of the genre was exponential at the time. It was flying. If you're only starting to release now, where the genre and a lot of other genres around it are going down in popularity, I wouldn't recommend an entirely self release strategy, because it's just gonna end up in you putting all your hard work into the creative side of things, and then having to do all the boring marketing and promotion side of things, and then maybe it works out, maybe more than likely it doesn't work out. Unfortunately, currently anyway, at least right now, it might change in a year or 2 years depending on the industry. But I would say the the, the mix it up, like release sometimes with a label to boost up your streams, to even though the streaming and the monthly listeners doesn't really mean a thing. It does help with the Spotify, what do you call it, the algorithmic playlists and stuff. So that can help boost you as an artist up in those algorithmic playlists, or algorithmic things like the radio and that kind of stuff. So if there are some labels that have a compilation release, or if there's labels that are looking for singles in a specific style, and that's the style you make, then I think it's definitely worth looking into the label and then send them a song or two, because there's a lot of really good labels. There's a lot of labels that do good work, and they can definitely get you a bigger boost than you could just starting out. Um, and in terms of solely releasing with labels, personally, I wouldn't, just because I I don't really have. I think it's because I have some solo releases that have done really well, and I want to continue to do that, if possible. It's very difficult, but I just love the solo release part of it and having full control. Um, but I know a lot of artists that release most of their albums, or at least try to release most of their albums or EPs with a specific label. And they might make uh, some edits to their music to match the style of the label. And I also don't think that's bad. Like, especially if your main job is music and you want to have control of the creative side of things, but you also want to make some money. You want to push yourself out there. You want to release an album, and if you release with this label, you're going to get a certain amount of streams, as opposed to the possibility of getting zero streams when you do a self release. So I don't do that, but I can see how it can definitely be a good thing if you find, as you said, find the right label. Like if you find the right label and you've done your due diligence and you've seen that they're not a scam, or they do pay you on time, they do actual work, and they're not just uploading your music, then, and you do have the chance to release with them quite often, then why not? I think you can give up 50% of $100, or you can keep 100% of like $1. The first one is definitely better. So if it's more of a financial thing, or if you're just starting out, trying to find a good label is definitely helpful. If you're lucky, then 100% do self releases, but I don't think that's possible for a lot of artists, including myself probably. But I still do it because I'm stubborn.
Definitely. I think there exists these stereotypes of artists, right? And sometimes we lean into those a little bit. And I feel like you have the on the one end of the spectrum, the loudmouth, I'm the greatest, I'm the best rapper on one side, and then on the other side, you've got the quiet bedroom producer, humble, self-effacing, makes absolute bangers and then proceeds to tell nobody about it.
Mhm.
So I really love this advice because I think that there's just such an immense amount of pressure to go independent and self-release on social media these days, with the assumption that every single artist is also cut out to be a like a social media content creator, and that sounds exhausting to me, man.
Um,
Go ahead.
Sorry, just to cut across. I was being, I think I was being very genre specific, with my responses, but I do agree with you in terms of the push, especially for vocalists, the push towards releasing doing self releases, and then spending 90% of your time on TikTok. And I can see that, like, also I couldn't do it, and fair play to the people who do it, because I do follow a lot of those on Instagram. I don't use TikTok, but on Instagram I do see some of them, and I'm like amazed by some of their content. Like, creating content is the hardest thing I've tried. Like, it's just it's not for me. I can't do it. I'm not good at it, and I I just cringe when I try to do it. But when I see people successfully do it, I'm like, that's, yeah, like hands. It's a different skill, and I don't think everyone has that skill, especially in the music side of things. So if you don't have that skill, definitely try it. But if you don't, then I don't think, as you said, like, I don't think you're gonna have fun trying to push content up for one song out for 3 months between releases, as all these YouTubers talk about how to do the perfect release strategy for TikTok, blah blah blah. It would drive me nuts personally, and I think it could drive a lot of people nuts if you're not ready for it. Like, if you are an artist and you're ready to create the content as well as the music, and you have a great balance between it, then 100% go self-release, because the labels will steal all the money for all your hard work. But if you're not really up to doing all that content creation, and you're not good at it, or it's making you tired and not creative, then yeah, I would go the other route.
Fantastic advice. We're getting to the end of the hour here. I really appreciate the time that you've given me today. So much to work with. I'd love to touch base in the future and see where you've come from since this talk. I guess what I wanted to ask here is, do you have any closing thoughts? And an almost not even directly music affiliated question, which is what keeps you in Korea?
Okay. Um, what keeps me in Korea is Uh, just it's I probably should say my girlfriend, but, um, probably just the the life I personally have here. Like, I have a great balance between, work, music, and my life in outside of everything. Um, as a very Korea can be very stressful, definitely for especially for Korean people. But for me, my current life in Korea is quite stress free. So I think that's the main thing that keeps me here. If I was in if I was in like Romania or something, I had the same life, I probably would find it very difficult to leave there too. If I was back home and I had the same life, it would be very difficult to leave. It's just um, I like um, I like the life I currently have here. If that were to change and I got a lot more stress was in my life, then maybe I would think about looking elsewhere or going back home. But I've been here so long, it's like Korea feels more like home than Ireland a lot of the time. Obviously, my family and friends, a lot of them are in Ireland, and I always have a nostalgia there, and I love going back there. Um, but yeah, currently the reason I stay in Korea is just the perfect work life music balance that I have here. And closing thoughts, you asked, was it?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
anything you wanted to wrap up with?
Um, I would say I have an album coming out. No, I mean for artists that are like starting out, or whatever, or still building up their audience, and I mean, I don't even speak uh, on behalf of a legend of the game or anything like that. I've got a few followers, and I've made a few albums, but I'm still learning. And I would say, um, don't really take stuff for granted. Like, yeah, if you're starting out and someone and you can work with someone, do that and don't try to do everything by yourself. Um, if you can work with artists that you think are better than you or have like do stuff that you think you can't do, even better. I think pushing yourself is a huge thing. And I know for a fact I've worked with artists that are better than me, and it helps me to like push myself in the future, or it just makes the song better, which is obviously a great one. But I would also say on the other side of it, like uh, I think we touched it earlier. Is like just and this is for all artists or whatever. Is yeah, I would say even if you can, it's very hard to do, but just don't worry so much about um the streams. Like I know it's a huge thing, especially when your finances are based around music. But if you can, and I'm still learning it myself, is just if you can get away from the algorithm and get away from the streams a little bit more and focus more on the art, I think that would that's a that would improve. It's improved my music, and I think it would improve uh, your mental health more than anything. Even if your music is the same or whatever, I think it's just a huge thing on people's mental health when they base their worth on streams or monthly listeners or whatever. And if that fluctuates, everything fluctuates, especially those things. So if that is where you're getting your self worth, I would definitely rethink it. And that would be my only advice as a person still doing that. I'm still currently in that bubble myself and trying to slowly emerge from it.
Break free of the algorithm, focus on the art. I couldn't think of a better message to leave off on. This has been Jimmy, no gimmicks. Thank you for letting me interview you today. I look forward to touching base with you again in the future. You take it easy, okay?
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to talking to you again. And
It was my pleasure. Have a good one.
cheers.